Hi and welcome to my YouTube. If you don't know me, my name is Lisa and I go by the YV Edit on here as well as on TikTok. You may have seen my videos before. If you haven't, welcome. Today we're talking about the parallels and similarities between current affairs in the US and Russia post the Soviet Union collapse. Because as somebody who grew up in the aftermath of that, I was literally born the year that the Soviet Union collapsed. I can tell you that right now, post this election, all of my alarm bells are going off and I'm having some really major flashbacks. So I just want to take y'all through some of the parallels here and give you a little sneak preview of what I ultimately hope doesn't happen, of what I ultimately hope we can avoid. We also need to be very realistic. America is a younger country. The cycles here haven't repeated time and time and time again. But time really is a flat circle, as evidenced by the rise and fall of different regimes over and over again all over the world. And Russia, of all places, has been through many, many, many regime changes, and the lesson has never, ever been learned. And I'm afraid that this Trump election is the first big lesson America is about to not learn. This will be written about in history books. I do believe that this election is really going to change the course of history. I filmed this video while getting ready, so don't mind me. You don't have to look at me. Most of this I'm going to read to you. There's no really graphics for you to look at. If there's something for you to look at, I'll let you know. Hope you enjoyed this breakdown. I'm most certainly going to run out of storage space before I'm able to record this entire thing. So there is going to be a part 2 coming out shortly of what I think is awaiting the US in the next decade or two, and then for a long time thereafter. And the biggest thing is, don't be afraid. You know what I mean? People have lived through it. It hasn't happened here yet. It's going to happen here. It's going to be very painful. But preparation is half the battle. So make sure, if nobody else has learned the lesson, that you learn the lesson before you have to. There may be some, hints in here for you. All right, enjoy. So I really don't know how to tell y'all this, but he's going to get it right this time. He's not about to make the same mistake he did the first time. As someone who wasn't born in the US, I was kind of wondering at first, why more people aren't for real freaking out about this, until I realized America's a very young country. I can tell y'all are not having the flashbacks like I am. I literally have not been able to get my shit together. Everything in my body and in my mind is genuinely telling me to enjoy these next 6 weeks. Frankly, I'm not in a position where I can get off this ride. So yeah, let me walk you through what's probably about to happen. We're just gonna do some light reading together. The important thing I want you to remember is, don't panic. People have lived through this. It's gonna be fine. So you may be wondering why I have Trump's cabinet behind me right now as I'm saying oh, he's gonna get it right this time, kind of menacingly. Let's talk about the mistake he made the first time. Okay, so this was Trump's cabinet in 2016. And a lot of these people want nothing to do with him anymore. And it's mostly the people that he picked based on their expertise and their respectability or reputability or what have you. Over the course of time, some of these people revealed themselves to be absolute ghouls, just not a shred of empathy to be found anywhere in their entire body. Not only that, but they also revealed themselves to be incredibly subservient to Trump. What I'm trying to say is that some people on this administration had certain boundaries, right? They had certain principles, even if those principles were selfish, right? Some of these guys were just oh, you're gonna screw me over, I'm gonna screw you over. And so those are the people that are no longer returning to the administration. The people that are returning to the administration are the people that basically would lick the bottom of Trump's shoe after he stepped in dog shit or human shit in Central Park. And then if afterwards he scolded them and told them that they licked the shoe wrong or that they didn't clean it well enough, they'd be oh, sorry, sir, here, I'll do it again. Just no hesitation, absolutely nothing else, just open their mouth and get to licking. So keep that in mind, because that's why I'm saying he's going to get it right this time. All right, because he learned his lesson. So the people that have stayed either because they are so greedy, they're so greedy to the point where all they care about is money. They don't have any personal principles, like complete sociopaths, right? They don't care how they get the money. They just want to get the money because money means power, and power means they get to do whatever they want to do and feel good about it. The other side of sociopathy is that they don't care what shit they have to lick off of somebody's shoe in order to continue receiving that kind of money and that kind of power. Where I come from, Ukraine, we have a very well-known word for that. That word is oligarch. That's what these people are. These are not government employees. These people are oligarchs. And now they're also government employees. That's also going to be important because the government controls a lot of money. And that's what these sociopath oligarchs love the fucking most. It's just money. That's literally all they care about. They would suck his dick on camera, on live television, on inauguration night. Any of them that he told to do that, they would do that if it meant he wasn't gonna like fire them or whatever, give them access to that sweet money. So those are the people he's keeping. Okay, I want you to notice who's gonna transfer on the next slide. Okay, so here's where he's not gonna get it wrong again. Basically, everybody he has chosen for cabinet has like an incredibly deep need to stay in the cabinet and to stay on Trump's good side. Because some of these people that he chose for his last administration, he chose them so that he would be associated with like good people. People that others considered of like high quality, high status. I just feel like he wanted to have decorum entering into that first administration. Thing is, a sociopath or a narcissist is always going to find a way to just do what they want. And they don't care what they have to do to get there, and they don't care what it looks like. Because here's the thing, they don't care what you think about them. The reason he's just flat out, people are like, oh, he's putting a pedophile. You realize he doesn't care. If there's anything better than a PDF file, it's a PDF file that you have dirt on and you can control. Oh, Matt Gaetz, this case, whatever. Yeah, exactly. So that means if Trump puts him in the cabinet and then he says, dance, monkey, dance, Matt Gaetz is gonna start dancing. That's precisely why he was chosen. That's what I'm trying to tell y'all. It's not that they don't see it or that they don't care. They do care. They want it to be that way. You'll notice there's several people on this list that are involved in some kind of, litigation or case or whatever. Trump himself included. Right? The reason it was so important for him to win this race was because he was going to probably go to jail otherwise, and now he can just pardon himself. It's like not only that, but his feelings are also hurt from the way that he was treated by all of these government employees that are just trying to do their job. So what he has went ahead and done is put people in the office who either A, have proved themselves to be a fucking lapdog that'll lick his fucking asshole as long as he keeps throwing a couple dollars their way. There's those folks, and then there's the category of folks who are just there to enrich themselves, which also means they have a stake. They want more government money. They want more deregulation. All of these like MyPillow CEOs and Elon Musk and whatever, all of those people are gonna make their way into the administration. All of these like powerful like business people. I wouldn't even be surprised if like Zuckerberg or somebody like that, like I don't know, but there's gonna be somebody like other giant business moguls that he's gonna try to loop into this. And eventually more of them will crack. Like I do think that a lot of them said no, which is why he had to dig for Elon Musk at the bottom of the barrel. Like Trump is not even on Twitter. Like it's so crazy that Elon Musk is like, yes, daddy. Like that's what I'm telling y'all. This is why this is such a nightmare. All of these people have a personal interest in becoming rich. That's what they've shown. And they've also shown that they will do anything. They'll do anything. They'll lick any boot. Half these people are people that were like defending him, like gagging on his shaft during the impeachment trials. It was those people that were like, nope, we don't see anything. You didn't do anything wrong. Even while some of their other Republican colleagues were like, no, this seems very clear. They were like, nope, I don't care. I don't think he did that. Now, come with me. Also, if you haven't heard, I'm starting a podcast with the Sovereign Woman and Quinn Veer. I'm going to tag them both below. It's called The Audacity, and there's a link in my bio. You can find it on any platform. Make sure you go ahead and check us out. Leave us a 5-star review, subscribe so that we get a boost in the algorithm. We are so excited to see y'all there. Here's what I actually think is going to happen, or like some version of this. Don't freak out. It's going to be okay. But here's what I legit think this man is gonna do. The reason I said earlier that this whole situation is giving me intense flashbacks is because I was born in Ukraine months after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And Russian politics were very important even in our country because of the nature of the Soviet Union and because of how basically everything Russia did would impact our economy and economy of like the surrounding nation states and things like that. Also because we didn't really have like too many of our own broadcast channels yet, so we would get broadcast channels from Russia. For that reason, everyone was kind of involved in the politics of this. Now, I was born, I was like 2 years old when this happened, and the subsequent like discussion of it, the subsequent politics of it is giving me flashbacks to now. This is the Russian parliament. Basically the White House, the Russian White House. The reason it looks like this on the top is because it got bombed. And you might be thinking, wow, that was probably a terror attack or some kind of horrible mutiny uprising, got its hands on weapons and decided to destroy the government, whatever. No, the person that bombed this building was actually bombing his very own office. And if you don't know who this is Boris Yeltsin, or you may know him as Boris Yeltsin. But yeah, he was technically, I guess, a dictator in Russia for like an awfully long time. And he actually hand-selected Putin to replace him. So it wasn't a change of regime. It was more of like a handing over of the power. Funny enough, this was also Russia's first democratically elected leader. And last. And last. So yeah, when you hear Trump saying that was going to be the last election you're ever going to vote in and stuff like that, just know it can happen as easy as this. Here comes that light reading I was talking about. This article published in 2018, so add 6 years. So 30 years ago, last night in Moscow, Russian President Boris Yeltsin ordered tanks and airborne troops to shell and storm the White House, or the Russian parliament, the Supreme Soviet building, to suppress the opposition trying to remove him. Go ahead and file that away. This article is more about declassified documents that kind of show how America aided and embedded this coup. Because the very next day, Bill Clinton called Yeltsin and was like, you did a great job, bro, like keep it up. That was used to basically legitimize this man's dictatorship, right? Like America's the superpower, and America had like at that point been working with Russia to sort of like, we'll get to that. But basically the defense minister was like in on it. He was like, let's bomb the parliament. Let's set off this beautiful fire, because he was a bootlicker. Because he was a bootlicker. He didn't care about what's right and what's wrong. He was like, yeah, let's burn this motherfucker down. You don't want to leave? I don't want you to leave. I've been doing great. So yeah, let's do this. So now, mind you, the year is like 1993. This is 2 years after the dissolution. And Russia, being sort of the aggressor of the whole thing, having sort of ruled with an iron fist, was finding itself in some very difficult economic circumstances, as other countries didn't want to trade with it and things like that. That should be ringing bells already, okay? If the bells are not ringing, let's ring them, okay? US has been a global superpower. Like, this is right after space race and things like that. Like, this was after the Soviet Union had emerged along with the United States in the 70s as a global superpower. So people had jobs, like STEM was a huge thing in Russia. Like, I don't know if y'all know this, but like STEM was a huge thing. There was women in STEM, there was men in STEM. Everybody was a fucking scientist, like everyone was a doctor, and boom, like bread lines. You know what I mean? Now, what else is gonna set off something like that? Starts with T and ends with tariffs. Because if the price of things goes up 60%, a lot of people are going to feel that same exact pain. Now, this part is going to ring some bells for sure. So rather than negotiating with the parliament, Yeltsin habitually ruled by issuing presidential decrees. In this country, do you know what we call those? We call those executive orders. Okay, so let's ring that bell too right now. The opposition, led by Vice President Alexander Rutsky and Chairman of the Supreme Soviet Ruslan Khasbulatov, God, it's so weird trying to pronounce these with an American accent, was growing in the parliament and in the regions and blocking most of the president's initiatives, which led to a paralysis of governing. Incoming U.S. administration started its dialogue with Russia in a state of virtual civil war between the executive and the legislature. This is where I'm going to need people to start grasping something. The US is a superpower right now, but that can all end really fucking quickly if all of a sudden this country is no longer like negotiating or like dealing with other countries because of like tariffs and stuff, because we've got a bunch of bootlicking morons in government that would look a man dead in the face who says maybe we should just like inject bleach or something into people's veins to cleanse them from COVID, and go, yeah, sir, that's a fucking great idea. Let's fucking do it. Call up Clorox. We're about to make so much fucking money. You need to understand, the only reason that didn't happen is because he didn't have the right people in office. And this time he will. So when he proposes like crazy tariffs and all this stuff, people are just going to sign off on it. He's not even going to need to do executive orders and like fight with the government, because they're going to say yes and then present their ass for fucking. We're so cooked. It's not even funny. So in this next exchange that's going to happen, I need you to realize America is not going to be on the side of America. Okay? These negotiations are going to be flipped with another country that's going to emerge as a superpower as a result of America's rapid decline due to these like tariffs and goods not being able to be produced at home. There's going to be a shortage of goods, and bad things are going to happen to our economy, and hyperinflation is going to happen. And let me show y'all something. You see this? This is how people were shopping. It's a flea market. So people were just like trading goods and stuff. Here in America, that's called like thrifting, and it's like fun and stuff. It's about to become really not fun. And like the whole rise in thrifting, it's all leading up to this. And this is why a lot of like immigrants, even like myself, I had a thrifting aversion for the longest time, because I would get flashbacks to shit like this. Because this wasn't just Russia, right? This was all the countries that were hurt by the USSR regime. This was how we all had to operate. And so a lot of people have like an aversion to thrifting, and they only like, new things. Because when you're doing this out of like a need, it's different, it feels different. But what I'm trying to say is that once these tariffs go in effect, now the tariffs are going to be on Chinese goods. And if anything, it's actually going to really expose the dependency that the United States has on cheap plastic Chinese goods. Even a lot of small business owners here in the US, which I have nothing against this, I'm just saying they're going to take a hit. There's a lot of small business owners that their whole thing is they curate stuff, like sell it back to the customers at a markup. It's coming from China, and they're buying it from Amazon, selling it back to you. But the prices of Amazon goods are also going to go up because of the tariffs. Now, again, if Americans start freaking out, things get really expensive and whatever, even if, I want you to realize too, it's kind of like poker and like showing your hand in poker, right? If the good folks over in China realize that we can pay these prices, we're just gonna bitch and whine and cry about it. And even if the tariffs come down, the prices, you realize, don't have to come down. And that's called China has you by the balls. And now, technically, there's nothing wrong with that. They worked hard for that position. Their people have been oppressed at least the last couple decades so that we could enjoy incredibly cheap goods. And now they can grab us by the balls. And so what's gonna happen in this, phone call when the American economy collapses is Trump is going to be calling somebody else to give him the blessing to do what I'm about to tell you he's going to do. And it's going to need to be a country that has emerged as more powerful and as a superpower so that they can agree to cooperate or whatever, and they can both now continue to fuck the citizens of the same country. Because to these people, it doesn't matter. They're sociopaths. And I need you to understand they don't see you as human beings. It's more of like a working stock or whatever they called us. So basically what Clinton and Yeltsin did was, under the guise of we need to bring democracy to Russia, they agreed that it would be okay for Yeltsin to dissolve the parliament that had been trying to hold him accountable and kick him out essentially of this presidency. In Clinton's first phone call to Yeltsin immediately after the latter issued Decree 1400 dissolving parliament and setting a date for early elections and a constitutional referendum, the US president expressed his full support and accepted Yeltsin's assurances that there would be no more bloodshed and the reform would move faster now that there would be no obstacles. U.S. support for Yeltsin remained unwavering all through the confrontation and after the Russian president issued the order to storm the parliament after initial violence on the part of the opposition. On the morning of October 4th, Muscovites awakened to the awful sight of the burning parliament building, the White House they had defended against the putsch in August 1991, just a couple years prior, where Yeltsin had stood on a tank and led the democratic forces. So yeah, the bell should be ringing at this point as well. January 6th, what you should be connecting with this. This is something I can see Trump doing, given the fact that there are probably going to be protests about the tariffs. There's a lot of his policies I think are going to turn out to be extremely unpopular. I think given this move and events like this, I think are actually going to be sensationalized and used by him and his proponents to justify like extreme measures on the White House, including things like, oh yeah, we had to open fire on it to prevent something worse, or like some sort of like monumental crisis that would put all of democracy into question, etc., etc., and then be used to institute like new reforms and give emergency powers to the president, etc., etc. So I do not think that it is outside of the realm of possibility that Trump eventually pulls a similar tactic where it's like, oh no, we've been attacked, and like now Trump needs to have like these executive powers and these superseding powers to deal with this crisis because the government was in on this, the Democrats were in on this. I don't know what they're gonna say, but they're gonna use this event or an event like it to sort of like sensationalize and justify doing something fucking crazy when it's time for him to be voted or removed out of office, which I think would be probably sooner even than 4 years. I think as soon as these tariffs go effect, a lot of people are literally going to riot, I hope. And his supporters are about to find out that he only encourages them rioting when it's in his defense, when it's in his favor. When they come out here to riot again because they can't afford shoes, clothing, gas, groceries, bread, when they come out and they try to do this again, he's going to mow them down. I promise you. And he's going to use it to say that there's a crisis in this country, the government needs to protect itself, or an attack is going to be staged on the government. Allegedly. I don't know. I'm just saying it's something that if I were inside of like his fucked up little head, that's how I would be thinking. On October 5, the day after the bloodshed, Clinton called Yeltsin and congratulated him for his handling of the situation. He did not ask about the loss of life. And he was basically lauded by the US government for staging an attack on himself and then using that as an excuse to dissolve the entire government and no longer be held accountable for anything. Basically, at this point, it's like a full-blown love affair between Clinton and Yeltsin that goes on for a very long time. Clinton was deeply committed to Russia's transformation to a democracy and market economy, as well as to its full integration into the Western world. Another top U.S. priority, though, was to safely manage the post-Soviet regathering of nuclear arsenal back to Russia and to help it dismantle and secure weapons and fissile materials. Given this setting, Yeltsin, with his resume of a democratically elected Russian leader and a defender of democracy during the coup of 1991, right when he basically busted into the White House, seemed like an ideal partner who could deliver on all U.S. priorities. According to Strobe Talbot, some of Clinton's advisors were concerned, rightfully, about Yeltsin's unwillingness to consult and compromise with the parliament, and advised Clinton to focus on principles and process, not personality. The president, however, was committed to Yeltsin as a personification of the revolutionary change and responded that this was a zero-sum thing. The perception only intensified during Yeltsin's final showdown with the Supreme Soviet in the final days of September 1993. Basically, this article is saying that the situation, like this entire mess, grew out of the extreme personification of US-Russia policy. So, like, out of the fact that they were fucking buddies, right? Mind you that Trump and Kim Jong-un have been, like, in very loving ways corresponding via letters and I'm sure other things for years now, and their relationship is very, very similar to this. And so my call is that this is going to happen with the US and China. Here's the other thing, but also from the black and white picture the Yeltsin camp presented of the political situation in Russia, painting his opponents as fascist and unreformed communists. In fact, it was the same Supreme Soviet that was elected in the lauded free elections of 1990 that elected Yeltsin, its chairman, and that granted him emergency powers to implement the radical economic reform in October 1991. Basically, under the guise of like economic reform, they were like, yeah, this guy can just, we're going to have to give him the power to do whatever he needs to do in order to get this country back on track. Like, our current checks and balances do not account for this. He's going to need to have some kind of supreme emergency powers. Watch for that, because that's going to happen. That's going to precede this. As the year 1993 progressed and the political confrontation in Russia deepened, the U.S. administration dealt exclusively with the Yeltsin camp and came to regard the opposition as the Russian interlocutors presented them. But most importantly, the stakes were very high. Yeltsin was a good partner who was willing to play on U.S. terms. So the U.S. basically saw dollar signs, right? They looked at Russia and like all this nuclear, like fission reactors, all this like weapons, whatever, and they saw dollars. And so they were like, well, this guy's willing to play ball with us. He doesn't really care if his country like benefits because he's only seen dollar signs too. This is gonna be great. Basically, they were like any other alternative, even especially, I would say, democratically elected, was deemed unlikely to be as cooperative or reliable. The Clinton administration was therefore highly invested in Yeltsin, and as Ambassador Pickering says, he told Strobe Talbot, you've got no other choice than to support Yeltsin and hope that the December elections would be free and fair, wink, wink. Not all actors on the US side share that opinion. Okay, I had to grab some food and come back because I had no idea we'd be here that long. If you're still watching this on TikTok, what are you doing here? Go to the YouTube. I'll see you there. Mwah. So the part I really want you to think about is how he was painting his opponents. They're just fascists and just they're bad people. Like, we have good people and bad people in this country. This is also very reminiscent of Trump's rhetoric. He's going to tell whoever emerges as the leader of the next global superpower, he's going to be like, this is just some really bad people in this country. They're too woke. This is why it wouldn't be in your interest to support like their side of it, which is usually the side of like democracy and liberation. Now, America at this point is like in its democracy, like it girl era. So there was like people on the US side that were like, oh, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Like, this is half baked. This is going to be an authoritarian regime. And it just did not matter to Clinton what these people said. He just kept supporting Yeltsin. And even after the disastrous election results in which Yeltsin's party received only 15% of the vote and the Constitution barely passed the referendum. I want you to know it can happen here. All you need is basically a giant crisis to be forced to rework the entire system under the guise of it's an emergency and the economy's so bad and everybody's going to die and nobody's going to have food to eat, which also may very well be true. So you may, as a citizen, be forced into this. But as a citizen, it doesn't even matter because only 15% of Russians voted for Yeltsin. And basically the system that emerged was essentially super presidential, not meaning like it was really super good, meaning that the president could bypass whatever laws he wanted with an executive order, which did not worry most senior US officials because then they only had to deal with the one guy, right? And he would just do whatever they wanted. And to this day, Russia is basically still ruled by oligarchs and an oppressive regime by a crazy person who is hell-bent on world domination and was handpicked by Yeltsin. Russia's only had one true democratic election in the entire lifetime of the country. And Trump's been taking notes on this. That's where it's gonna go. Now there's other factors, okay? So if you're really wondering about what this means for the economy, things like that, and like what are the parallels with economies, go ahead and buckle up for this next part. I'm about to take you on a journey. Let's talk about what I think is gonna happen to the economy. So Russia was transitioning from a state-controlled economy to a market-oriented economy. I need you to understand how similar this is to America. Basically, Russia had a lot of other countries by the balls because there was like their democratically elected leaders or whatever that were supporting the USSR, and they were basically saying like have to work within the USSR, otherwise it's like not good for the economy, da da da. Now it was terrible for the economy either way because the rich were only getting richer and the poor were only getting poorer, and the wealth gap was just growing and growing and growing, which led to many uprisings within these like surrounding countries and led to ultimately the dissolution of the USSR. So now Russia is standing here cold and naked and hungry because even though Russia is like a huge country, a lot of the land is like not fertile, it's cold, they've been like dumping nuclear waste everywhere. Like if they were on like a Catan board, they would only have like wood and like ore. Russia is standing here cold, hungry, and naked. Now I need y'all to understand that while yes, again, the US is a huge country, still a lot of products imported. Maybe not as much food, but yeah, a lot of food still, because the US, I don't think, produces enough food to feed the entire population. So if all of a sudden countries were no longer willing to deal with us because of tariffs and because it wasn't like profitable for them to export their goods or whatever into the United States, and they decided not to do it, a lot of Americans would be standing there cold, naked, and hungry. Red states especially. So basically at this point, whatever's going to happen is going to be difficult and painful and rough either way. Okay, the bells should be going off right now. So they chose some policies for this transition, which were liberalization, stabilization, and the most important number 3, privatization. The privatization of a lot of things around here is still like really up for grabs, which is why Elon Musk has been brought into the government efficiency whatever program, because they're going to go ahead and tear that budget apart and see what they can vulture from it as far as being able to privatize things. This next section basically covers what we've already gone over, the fact that Yeltsin took all of this as an opportunity to like give himself ultimate like executive powers, which basically eliminated any meaningful discussion of the right course of action in the country. Basically assigned these programs, liberalization and stabilization, to a liberal economist inclined towards radical reform and widely known as an advocate of shock therapy. All right, go ahead and walk with me. The partial results of liberalization, aka lifting price controls, included worsening already apparent hyperinflation. Initially, that was due to monetary overhang and exacerbated after the central bank, an organ under parliament, which was skeptical of Yeltsin's reforms, was short of revenue and printed money to finance its debt. This resulted in the near bankruptcy of much of Russian industry. There's exactly one thing that Donald Trump is good at. The one thing he's done successfully over and over and over and over and over again in his life. And that is none other than bankruptcy. I realize the US doesn't have the best like price control system right now, but there are some systems in place that sort of control price gouging. Know that that is going to go out the window because of the tariffs, right? The tariffs are going to make it impossible to control price gouging because prices are going to go out of control because of the tariffs, which is going to lead to America overextending itself. Because what else comes from China? Like all of weapon stuff, a lot of like computer chips, all that the government has like stakes and investments in. And when those industries start crying, the government is definitely going to overextend itself to help these people. And the central bank, an organ under parliament, right, kind of like the US Treasury, is going to be short of revenue. And they've already been doing this, so it's not even, you're not even going to blink an eye. They don't even have to tell you when they're doing this, but they're going to print money to finance their debts. This will result in the bankruptcy of American industry. I promise you this. He didn't finish the job the first time. He's not done until it's bankrupt. And that's exactly what he's going to do. The process of liberalization would create winners and losers, depending on how particular industries, classes, age groups, ethnic groups, regions, and other sectors of Russian society were positioned. Some would benefit by the opening of competition, others would suffer. Among the winners were the new class of entrepreneurs and black marketeers that had emerged under the perestroika, which is a whole different thing. But liberalizing prices meant that the elderly and others on fixed incomes would suffer a severe drop in living standards, and people would see a lifetime of savings wiped out. There was like a lot of elderly people during this time literally begging for money on the streets instead of like living out the rest of their life in peace and enjoying the fruits of their labor, like working their entire life. They were literally living in squalor, and people would see a lifetime of savings wiped out. So now with inflation at double-digit rates per month as a result of printing, macroeconomic stabilization was enacted to curb this trend. Stabilization, also called structural adjustment, is a harsh austerity regime for the economy in which it seeks to control inflation. Under the stabilization program, the government let most prices float, raised interest rates to record highs, raised heavy new taxes, sharply cut back on government subsidies to industry and construction, and made massive cuts in state welfare spending. These policies caused widespread hardship. While all of this seems like maybe good, like cutting back on government subsidies, etc., it's gonna suck at first. Just brace for that. All of these enterprises found themselves trying to finance, trying to credit their ventures. And basically this entire credit crunch shut down many industries and brought about a protracted depression. The rationale of the program was to squeeze the built-in inflationary pressure out of the economy so that producers would begin making sensible decisions about production, pricing, and investment. Bells should be ringing, people, instead of chronically overusing resources, a problem that resulted in the shortages of consumer goods in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. This should be ringing bells. By letting the market rather than central planners determine prices, product mixes, output levels, and the like, the reformers intended to create an incentive structure in the economy where efficiency and risk would be rewarded and waste and carelessness were punished. Removing the causes of chronic inflation, the reform architects argued, was a precondition for all other reforms. Hyperinflation would wreck both democracy and economic progress, they argued. They also argued that only by stabilizing the state budget could the government proceed to dismantle the Soviet planned economy and create a new capitalist Russia. I hate to break it to you, things did not get better. During the height of hyperinflation in 1992 to 1993, the central bank actually tried to derail reforms by actively printing even more money during this period of inflation. After all, the Russian government was short of revenue and was forced to print money to finance its debt. As a result, inflation exploded into hyperinflation, and the Russian economy continued into an ever more serious slump. Upon the Soviet Union's collapse, the new Russian government was forced to manage the huge state enterprise sector inherited from the Soviet economy. Privatization was carried out by the State Committee for State Property Management of the Russian Federation, with the primary goal being to transform the formerly state-owned enterprises, listen, into profit-seeking businesses, listen, which would not be dependent on government subsidies for their survival, listen. To distribute property quickly and to win over popular support, the reformers decided to rely mostly on the mechanism of free voucher privatization, which was earlier implemented in Czechoslovakia. The Russian government believed that the open sale of state-owned assets as opposed to the voucher program would have likely resulted in further concentration of ownership among the Russian mafia and the nomenklatura, which they sought to avoid. So just so you know, they're like kind of skating over this Russian mafia thing, but just know that that all happened during the time of like economic hardship. Now, there was also privatization of the oil sector, which is its own whole thing, but that might happen here too. I mean, oil is a big thing, and you might be seeing some oil tycoons pretty soon around here as well. This privatization had been partial, referring to the oil privatization, because the federal government had obtained ownership positions in several companies and had also retained full control over the transport of oil to lucrative world markets. This is something America does already, by the way. Then in 1995, facing severe fiscal deficit and in desperate need of funds for the 1996 presidential election, the government of Boris Yeltsin adopted a loans for shares scheme proposed by a banker and endorsed by Deputy Prime Minister, where basically some of the largest state industrial assets were leased through auctions for money lent by commercial banks to the government. And this would basically be akin, if any or all of this, like economic collapse type stuff went on in the US, which everybody's predicting. And the government said, hey, there's like certain government funded programs we can no longer afford, and we're gonna have to auction them off to make money for the government. And they said, you know, okay, first up for sale is NASA. And they're like, is there anybody who wants to buy NASA? Possibly Elon Musk is like, oh, sure, you know, I'll do this country a favor and I'll buy NASA. I'll take it off your hands so that the government can have money and can continue to function. Okay, perfect. That'll cost you like $17 billion or whatever. And Musk is like, I'll give you 3. It's gonna still need to be funded by like government and taxpayer money for the next few years, and then eventually like da-da-da will take over. Government's like, well, we have no choice. I guess we have to do this. Just like everything else, he runs it into the ground. The economy is in shambles. Even the president doesn't have money to fund his own campaign. Then he's like, hey, Elon, what if you gave me a loan out of that NASA's valuation, right now that NASA's on the private market? Or what if you like loaned me a share of their valuation so that I could run my campaign? That's basically what was happening in Russia. And now that I spell it out like this, I hope you can see how easily something like this would actually be able to happen in America. The auctions were rigged and lacked competition, being largely controlled by favored insiders with political connections or used for the benefit of the commercial banks themselves. As neither the loans nor the leased enterprises were returned in time, this effectively became a form of selling or privatizing state assets at very low prices. Okay, so this word should be very familiar to you at this point as an American. The privatization facilitated the transfer of significant wealth. Okay, you heard that? Wealth transfer to a relatively small group of business oligarchs and new Russians, particularly natural gas and oil executives. And oh boy, the way that I could just keep going and will. Oh, this part is called depression. After the initial turmoil and euphoria of early marketizations, Russia's economy sank into deep depression by the mid-1990s due to botched reform efforts and low commodity prices globally. But not before George H. Bush helped Yeltsin with an unparalleled opportunity to change the nuclear posture of both the United States and the Soviet Union, and to end the Cold War peacefully with the none-lugger cash-for-weapons scheme in order to avoid the worst of the dissolution of the vast Soviet technological empire. So basically, U.S. bought all their nukes off of them and was like trying to talk them off the ledge a little bit. They were like, listen, buddy, we know things are rough. Why don't you give us that gun? We'll give you like $50 for it and go spend that money however you want. And Russia was like, yeah, okay. Russia's economy was hit further by the financial crash of 1998 before experiencing a modest recovery in 1999 and 2000, so for 1 year, as commodity prices began to rise again. According to Russian government statistics, the economic decline was far more severe than the Great Depression was in the United States in terms of GDP, gross domestic product. In 1995, a little over 3% of the workforce was officially registered as unemployed, but in addition to the technically jobless, 4.4% of the labor force was only working part-time, while a further 3.9% had been sent on involuntary leave. Also, millions of Russians turned up to work each day, but were not paid by the employers. If all these categories of jobless, semi-employed, and unpaid workers were taken into account, the 18% Russian unemployment figure cited in June 1995 by labor market expert Tatiana Malieva of the Institute of Economic Analysis seemed real. The women knew what was going on all along. With unemployment benefits sufficient only to buy a small loaf of bread each day, trying to survive without some other income was not an option for those who lost jobs. They were toiling during the warmer months to grow food in family vegetable plots, selling newspapers or lottery tickets on the streets, busking, begging, turning to prostitution. Often they sank into the criminal underbelly. Just a little preview for y'all. I'm not saying this is gonna happen. I'm just saying it's very plausible. It's plausible. All the parallels are there. All the timelines line up. Our unemployment rate looks very similar right now, and we are also not taking into account people that are doing like gig work, like things like that. So then in 1997, at least 98,500 companies were defaulting on payments to employees. It was estimated that 1 out of 4 Russian workers, or close on 20 million people, were not paid for months. Some were paid in kind. For example, women workers were paid in brassieres and shoes that they resold in the streets. The workers of Moskvich, the auto part in Moscow, were paid in spare parts. Those of the Ivanova textile plants were paid in bed sheets, and those of the Huskrustalny porcelain factory were paid in crystal and ceramic vases. By way of a domestic comparison, the post-Soviet economic decline was about half as severe as the economic catastrophe born out of the immediate consequence of World War I, the fall of Tsarism, and the Russian Civil War. And this all shows you that the lessons were not learned. And America is about to not learn its first really, really, really big lesson. Following the economic collapse of the early 1990s, Russia suffered from a sharp increase in the rates of poverty and economic inequality. Estimates by the World Bank, based on both macroeconomic data and surveys of household incomes and expenditures, indicate that whereas 1.5% of the population was living in poverty, that poverty level was defined as income below the equivalent of $25 per month. In the late Soviet era, by 1993, between 39 and 49% of the population was living in poverty. Per capita income fell by another 15% by 1998, according to government figures. Public health indicators show a dramatic corresponding decline. Although all post-Soviet countries experienced an immediate decline in birth rates due to economic turmoil, this may have been particularly acute in Russia. In 1999, total population fell by about 750,000 people. Meanwhile, life expectancy dropped for men from 64 years in 1990 to 57 years by 1994, while women's dropped from 74 to about 71. Both health factors and a sharp increase in deaths of the youth demographic from unnatural causes such as murder, suicides, and accidents have significantly contributed to this trend. Closely related to the declining life expectancy, alcohol-related deaths skyrocketed 60% in the 1990s, and deaths from infectious and parasitic diseases shot up 100%. Mainly because medicines were no longer affordable to the poor, which I will remind you was 50% of the population. This can very easily happen here. While the opening of the Russian market to imports in the early 1990s meant the nation no longer suffered from supply shortage of consumer goods, the relative impoverishment of the Russian people during this time meant only a limited number saw any significant benefit. Russians on fixed incomes, which was the vast majority of the workforce, saw their purchasing power drastically reduced. While the stores might have been well stocked in the Yeltsin era, average people could now afford to buy little, if anything, from the stores. By 2011, the average income has risen to more than $700 per month, emblematic of the mild recovery in recent years, largely due to high oil prices. The growing revenue, however, has not been evenly distributed. Social inequality has risen sharply since the 1990s, with the Gini coefficient, for example, reaching 42% by the end of 2010. Russia's income disparities are now nearly as large as Brazil, which has long been a world leader in this area, while regional disparities in the level of poverty continue to trend upwards. Structural reform and a severe devaluation of the ruble, which is like their dollar, lowered the standard of living for most segments of the Russian population. As a result, there was powerful political opposition to reform. Democratization opened the political channels for venting these frustrations, which translated into votes for anti-reform candidates, especially those of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation and its allies in the Duma, which is like the Congress or something like that. Russian voters able to vote for opposition parties in the 1990s often rejected economic reforms and yearned for the stability and personal security of the Soviet era. These were the groups that had enjoyed the benefits of the Soviet era state-controlled wages and prices, high state spending to subsidize priority sectors of the industry, protection from competition with foreign industries, and welfare entitlement programs. That's going to be us. That's going to be like millennials and Gen X. Gen Z will not know this. Gen Alpha will not know this. During the Yeltsin years in the 1990s, these anti-reformist groups were well organized, voicing their opposition to reform through strong trade unions, associations of directors of state-owned firms, and political parties in the popularly elected parliament whose primary constituencies were among those vulnerable to reform. A constant theme of Russian history in the 1990s was the conflict between economic reformers and those hostile to the new capitalism. In the 1990s, former Soviet bureaucrats, factory directors, aggressive businessmen, and criminal organizations used insider deals, bribery, and simple brute force in order to grab lucrative assets, which were previously state-owned. Russia's new capitalists spent millions of dollars for protection. However, almost every business in Russia, from curbside vendors to huge oil and gas companies, made payments to organized crime for protection, which we used to call krysha, means roof. Businessmen said that they needed the krysha because the laws and the court system were not functioning properly in Russia. Know that that's going to happen here too. The only way for them to enforce a contract was to turn to a criminal krysha. They also used it to intimidate competitors, collect debts, or take over new markets. It was also increasingly common for businesses to turn to the red krysha, corrupt police, who ran protection campaigns. This system, a sharp rise in contract killings developed. So again, just a little bit of a preview. All of this lines up. Trump is saying that he's going to give the police immunity. He's saying that he's going to privatize public sectors. He's assigning Elon Musk to overhaul the government and make it more efficient, meaning they're literally going to be selling off assets of the government to towards private ownership, towards privatization. They're going to say, oh my God, we're spending so much money in the government, except for the military sector, of course. We can never spend enough on that. But everywhere else, this social security, all these welfare programs, all this, we're spending so much money. We're going to need to sell these things off to where private enterprises are going to buy them and make them for profit or run them into the ground. Doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter. And because there's going to be no social safety net, everybody's going to be out for themselves. That's a perfect environment for a bunch of crime to rise to the point where, if you're going to start a business, you're going to need protections. You're going to need criminals to protect you from other criminals. Okay, so just as I thought, I'm definitely running out of phone storage space. I'm going to have to edit this and post it as a part 1. And in part 2, we're going to cover the rise of the oligarchs and the subsequent economic implications that happened after that. Because right now, a lot of people in America have been using this word oligarchs to describe the private sector entrepreneurs and I'm afraid that y'all haven't really seen a real oligarch yet. You're about to find out what those people really are. But yeah, we'll cover all that in part 2. I'm hoping to film it tomorrow and post it over the weekend. Today's Thursday. You'll probably be seeing this video on Friday. Part 2 should be out Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I don't know. I'm not going to make any promises. I love y'all. Thanks for watching. If you're still here, thanks for staying till the end. Please, please, please make sure you go subscribe and rate our podcast. We're going to have episodes dropping on November 25th. If you have questions you want us to cover in our mailbag segment, please do email us at mailbag@sirensound.co. Not C-O-M, just C-O. Mailbag@sirensound.co. All right, I'll see y'all in part 2. Godspeed. Mwah.